Surveillance cameras are everywhere today, from stores and stadiums to banks, airports, and schools. They are an integrated part of modern life. Take your real-time insights to the next level and learn how mobile sensors and artificial intelligence can help predict and prevent problems before they occur while improving your customer journey. Walk-based mobile insights puts the power of advanced sensors and deep computer learning to work for you. Take charge of your future and get in front of the power curve. Learn more today at walkbase.com. That's walkbase.com.
I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Chicago. It is July 1949. A very particular place, 71st and Lawrence. There are 350 police arraigned to protect two people, Roscoe and Ethel Johnson. They are being attacked. Molotov cocktails are being thrown. It looks like a race riot. It is, in fact, part of the landscape of Chicago over this last century, transforming itself from a brutish Midwestern town that was a railroad head in the 19th century into a modern and what I learn, and I accept the metaphor, a modern and vibrant new city, the Third Coast. When Chicago built the American dream. Thomas Dyja, he joins me in my studio. Tom, a very good evening and welcome. Your metaphor of the Third Coast, of course, that would be the East Coast, the West Coast, and the Third Coast.
The coast of Lake Michigan, right.
But I start you in this instance in July 49, and it continues in a parish called Visitation, Englewood, February of 1950. More firebombing, more attacks. It looks like a white mob surrounding a single black family or a few black families who want to move into better housing. Is this moment in Chicago, Adlai Stevenson is the governor, is this moment in Chicago typical or an outside example of how Chicago saw itself in 1949, 1950?
No, these are significant standout moments, but during that whole period, as Elizabeth Wood, a housing pioneer in Chicago, said, under a virtual guerrilla war. The integration of African Americans into Chicago, which never really took place, counted hundreds and hundreds of racial incidents. These are two of the most visible and I think landmark because they did bring a lot of public attention to what was going on in Chicago.
Right. They had made the headlines. Mayor Keneally at this time, correct?
Right.
And Governor Stevenson. Did Governor Stevenson, who goes on to run for the presidency twice in the Democratic ticket, did he have a strong reaction to this race riot?
Well, an even bigger, more visible event is later in 1950, which is the Cicero riot. Which in
Cicero's outside of New York.
Cicero's a suburb just on the other side of the border from Chicago. In a way, I compare it in the book to Austria to Germany. It's just a little more like Chicago.
That's
than Chicago
when the Tuskegee graduate, the veteran, tried to move into
moves
the
into an apartment in Cicero,
Right.
and it is surrounded by thousands of whites who firebombed the building, trash his apartment. He, of course, says he's not going to go back there. Adlai Stevenson, sends in the National Guard to basically protect him and bring peace to this neighborhood. Walter White, who's head of the NAACP, goes there, says he's never seen anything like it in America. It's a profoundly shaming moment for Chicago. It's international news, and it's on live television, some of it. So it's this kind of white riot that's being shown around the world. This is how Chicago deals with race.
And that story is what Tom helps me understand, because this was building a long time. We go back to the turn of the century. We need to do some definitions. Tom's book has these wonderful maps in the beginning. I did not know Chicago. I've been there. I've had to spend moments in the airport, and I've wandered around Michigan Avenue, and I've been to bookstores there, but I've never walked the streets. It's a vast area along the lake, but people who know Chicago understand that the neighborhoods are distinct, and you know the boundaries very clearly. At the beginning of this century, what were the old settlers? What did that refer to?
Everyone who was in Chicago before 1910 was kind of semi-officially an old settler, but it's really strict term of art in the discussion of race especially, is that the old settlers referred to the black population of Chicago before 1910, who were basically lived wherever they wanted to because their presence was so small that they were not politically significant. During World War I, they begin to be funneled towards the near south side, kind of south of Cermak Roosevelt Road, in what used to be a very wealthy neighborhood, which has since abandoned. All the wealthy families moved to the north side, and it became what's been called Bronzeville.
Right.
So
I learned from you it's called Bronzeville, and it's a distinct neighborhood, although I couldn't tell where it started and where it stopped.
It's one of those terms that is used alternately as Bronzeville being Black Chicago as a whole, which is kind of false. Bronzeville, in strict terms, is kind of that section from maybe State Street east and in the 30s, from the upper 20s to the lower 40s or so, that's Bronzeville, really. And that's a place where Mahalia Jackson lived and full of Louis Sullivan buildings and the birth of gospel and the blues. I mean, it's an incredibly exciting birthplace of a lot of American culture is in this little neighborhood on the south side.
Which is why you spend a deal of time there over the decades, because
people,
political actors and musicians and artists move in and out of Bronzeville. There's a building there, in fact, you feature called the Mecca. What is that?
The Mecca was a big apartment building built for the Columbian Exhibition in the 1890s. And it began as this big first luxury kind of hotel. And over the years, it becomes nice apartments, and then it slides into a kind of blue class level until it's part of Black Chicago by the 20s. And at that point, it becomes a landmark for Black Chicago. It's actually a kind of point of pride. It's this big, seething apartment building full of Black drama and what people are bringing to Chicago from all parts of the world. Chicago at this point is, as John Johnson, the founder of Ebony magazine, says, it was the Mecca of Black America on the move.
And this was the Mecca of the Mecca.
Exactly, right. This was the kind of the heart of it, So over the years, it began to degrade and decay. And IIT, the Illinois Institute of Technology, which was a kind of local technical school down there, was feeling the need to either expand or leave. And so one of the places that they targeted in their expansion was the Mecca. And this becomes a kind of, I think, psychological battleground for Chicago in many ways. The person they bring in to redo the campus for IIT is a man named Mies van der Rohe.
Yeah, born Aachen, 1886, a man who has a troubled reputation because of his willingness to cooperate with the Hitlerites before he left Germany. I'm being diplomatic.
I think that would be probably strong. I mean, he was very strictly concerned with the spirit of the building, what the building was doing, and he would pretty much work with anybody who would give him work. If the Nazis had said, yes, we're rebuilding Berlin, and we think that you would get the contract, chances are he might have gone. Gropius left. So many people left.
Gropius of Bauhaus, Mahalia of all of these men wind up in Chicago. And it's one of the sub-themes of your wonderful book, Tom, that people just turn up in Chicago. You think, I'm going to America, and all of a sudden you're in Chicago.
Well,
do they do it on purpose? Are they invited there?
Well, some of it's the food. A lot of the Germans came, the Germans came from the Bauhaus, but also the University of Chicago, and brought over a whole host of German emigres and Eastern European emigres because they could find a nice strudel in Chicago. We had a very strong German population, so that part they were very comfortable with. And then as well, the structure of the university was very comfortable for those people as well. So the kind of ethnic diversity of Chicago helped attract some of those people, but it's also part of what Chicago always was for America, and that was a crossroads for the nation. And so they came naturally, all these people, Black, white, German, Southern Black, they came there because it was where America met.
And lived in neighborhoods. And the spine of the book for me is the African American, the Black confrontation with white America. Although inside white America, there are ethnicities we can explore. A dominant ethnicity is Catholic. I learned from you that one way to think about 1950s and before Chicago is to think of it as the Catholic town. 261 parishes, 2.5 million Catholics.
Yeah, I mean, out of a city with 3.5 million people, there were more than 2 million Catholics in it. So there were, during this post-war era, you get an enormous amount of planning. How do we deal with Chicago in the future, and what do we do in this post-war world? And great, brilliant planners come and try to look at the map of the city and dissect it and come up with things to do with it. But the one map they don't look at is the one that 2/3 of the city look at, and that is the map of the parishes of the city. I grew up Catholic in Chicago, and people asked where you were from. You'd say St. John Bosco,
right,
or St. Robert Bellarmine,
or the
Visitation.
Yeah.
2/3 of the city looked at a different map of the city, and so there was a movement to kind of centralize a lot of things across America and across the world. The United Nations was part of this. All these things where we were looking, wiser people were making plans, and how we're going to deal with this world. And the Catholic Church in Chicago was doing that as well. Catholicism is not really an ethnicity. What you had were different ethnic churches. There'd be a Bohemian Catholic Church and a Polish Catholic Church, and these were almost worlds of their own. And the Archdiocese in Chicago, the hierarchy, was much more liberal than these kind of local churches, and spent a lot of time trying to kind of break them down. And some of the racial tension that comes out later and through this period is part of also a conflict of a more liberal hierarchy arguing with a more conservative, for lack of a better word. I mean, I'm not talking about in the terms we use now, but a more less enlightened, in this sense, Catholic priesthood and parishes. So the idea of cafeteria Catholicism, in my mind, comes out of this period where people rejected the integration teachings of the church, that came down from the Pope, and they turned from that and defined their Catholicism in terms of keeping the neighborhood white.
The book is The Third Coast, When Chicago Built the American Dream. Thomas Dyge is the author. When we come back, the art of Chicago, the novels of Chicago, and the music, especially the music. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show.